Hello, artists and animators, and welcome to today's Rig Show and Tell. Plamen Ananiev is a rigging artist and animator based in the UK, and Heather Vogel is also based in the UK and is a senior game artist and designer. We invited Plamen and Heather onto our stream to discuss the Goyle Girl character, which Heather designed and Plamen rigged. Heather, Plamen, welcome to the stream.
Hi.
Hello, thanks for having us.
So before we get into this character, I just wanted to ask, Plamen, what does a typical day as a technical animator look like?
That's a good question. Honestly, I didn't know that myself until I started doing this job, and I think it kind of really varies depending on the studio. But basically, what my job is at the moment, I am kind of wrangling the pipeline of the show between animation effects and the comp departments. So basically, trying to make sure that things are flowing from one department into the other in a kind of orderly fashion. Also helping out. I'm helping the tech director with some stuff on the side, rig testing. So a lot of it's a mixed bag of stuff.
And so we're here to discuss the Goyle Girl character, which Heather designed. Before we get into the rig, let's talk about the character design. Heather, what led to you designing this character?
Well, it's a weird story. It doesn't really come from anything that we were like intending to animate or anything. But it was basically created during lockdown where everyone was really bored. We couldn't do anything else. You know, you eat too much, drink too much, and strange things happen. It basically came from like my two friends that I kind of hang out with a lot more, and we made a joke that one of my friends is like the king of Streatham, you know, because he studied like model making and architecture, and he'd walk around and say, I wouldn't have put those trees there, and I wouldn't have put this path here. This should have been designed like this. And so we kind of like joke around, call him the king of Streatham. But then we thought, oh, he needs to have like, you know, someone to like make sure like this area is safe and people are behaving themselves during lockdown. And that's when Goyle Girl came. And basically it was just a shortened word for gargoyle, because I went through a weird period of shortening words unnecessarily. And yeah, she needed like so she basically goes around like sitting on people's walls, like looking out for wrongdoers, so people littering, or, you know, pigeons like being in PlayStation B, or old ladies parking no parking places, or stuff like that. And she needed a lookout, and so I thought, okay, I could be the lookout. And I thought, well, what could I do as a lookout? Like be like super, like hidden away, so no one like really notices me. So I could be like disguised. And I thought, I'd be a flamingo, but like those lawn ornaments, you know. So we thought, I could be called Mingo, so it'd be Goyle Girl and Mingo, and as a gang. And yeah, I can't just literally stand around there. And I think this was also, I had like a knee injury recently, so being a flamingo with a knee injury is probably the most ridiculous thing as well, because I can't really stand on one leg.
I do like the idea of extremely small scale superheroes tackling tiny problems. It's delightful. Could we just bring on screen the lineup of these three characters? Because I think that's delightful.
So yeah, as you can see, the king of Streatham is not the most conventional king ever. My friend is a New Zealander, so they don't wear shoes.
I'm pretty sure they do.
He doesn't like
He doesn't.
And
they're all hobbits there. Yes.
Yeah.
He had the most amazing lockdown hair ever. Me and my friend Prina were like super jealous about him because he had the best hair. As you can see, I've illustrated that there. Yeah, and he loves to bake. So those are his kind of kingly, like, you know, things that he holds.
Implements.
Yeah. And then there's Goyle Girl in the middle there. I think, like, yeah, she's just like picked out stuff from home to try and make herself look like a a sort of like a gargoyle creature thing. So she's wearing like a swimming cap with some horns, you know, glued on or something, and some kind of marigold gloves, something like that. And that's me, like with my fringe in the hoodie, dressed up as a flamenco. Yeah, so that's us.
All right. And do we want to just go through some of the design materials? So we have this lineup, and I think you also had a turnaround and some expressions and poses.
Plamen, if you could go to.
Which one?
Yeah,
Turnarounds?
that's basically yeah. So this is the kind of turnaround that I gave Plamen to use as a guide to make the rig. Yeah, I mean, I think the hardest bit was trying to figure out like how her hair like would be, like would she have like bits and gaps in between her neck, but I thought that was just a bit too noisy and ended up just kind of closing that hole up, so she's got massive hair, which is great for her silhouette. Yeah, and I kind of picked her colors to kind of match, because you must be at nighttime, so she's got to kind of blend in with the scenery and be all blues really, and then the typical superhero Goyle Girl logo. I imagine it's probably made out of glitter or something.
Self-made.
Yeah,
it was a really interesting process, because what we kind of started with was the image on the left where she's in a pose. So I literally asked Heather, hey, can you give me, you know, a front and a quarter front view or something? And she did in about a day or so. That was done. I did my rigging. That was like, hey, can you give me some head turns? You know, like maybe I can switch to that actually. Yeah, there you go.
So like
And
all
again, a day or so, I just got those and started kind of implementing everything there as we were going. It was a very fluid process we went through.
Yeah, like these sketches were just literally made to help Plamen do what he needed to do. They weren't to be pretty or anything like that. It was all for like fit for purpose kind of stuff. So you can see like there's just little assets of the feet and the hands, just to see what's inside of the gloves, the colors are inside the shoe, and where the shadows would lie on the sleeves and stuff like that. So yeah.
Do you want to show off your exploration process?
Yeah. So
before she became Goyle Girl.
Yeah. So these were like the awful sketches that I started off with in the very beginning. It kills me to show everyone this, but this is how it started. She started off very young, and I very quickly realized that it was a bit weird for someone of that age to be
tackling criminals,
running around attacking people for no reason, for littering. So she had to grow up very quickly. And yeah, I was just trying to play around with her shape and the style and figure out like what her costume would look like. Would she have her face covered completely, typical superhero style? Like, does she need knee pads? She does a lot of so much she might need them, who knows. And yeah, I ended up settling with the one obviously on the far right, because I just felt like it was less cheesy and it was more homemade feeling. Like it wasn't don't take me too seriously kind of superhero. I mean, she takes herself seriously, but she's like clearly not a real superhero. So yeah, that was it. And then if you go into the next slide, yeah, she started off, I was trying to literally just at the first color pass, just trying to figure out not so much like her final colors, but just trying to figure out how I would go about styling her, like the line work. Would it be like internal line work? Would it be external line work? Is she flat color? Stuff like that. Yeah. And then, yeah, I realized, you know what, she kind of looks like my friend. So I made her Indian instead of white. So there we go. And she looks way better. She looks so much better.
Yeah, she does.
Yeah.
It's an interesting thing, by the way. One of your old designs, she actually has wings, which would really make sense with a gargoyle. I remember literally asking our friend Perina that she's based off, why does your character have no wings? And she was like, gargoyles have wings? I was like, yeah, that makes sense. Perfect. Checks out. She just has no idea. Yeah. But
Yeah.
that's the first image I saw with the 3 characters in a lineup. That was like, yeah, I'd like to rig one of those.
Yeah, so they might eventually all get rigged in the future.
Oh, cool. Yeah, that'd be great.
Yeah. Um, it was great, like working with Plamen on this, because she had been sitting in my files for like months and months, not doing anything, and I had sort of like had in my back of my mind, I was like, oh, I think I need to do more, like try and explore her character, how does she move, and all this kind of stuff. But I just never had the time or the energy to want to do it, and then Plamen came along with this task, and I was like, yes, okay, I've got some characters for you. Pick one. Yeah, and yeah, so now the ball got rolling.
All right, so Plamen, I want to ask you, what led you to decide to rig this character and not the flamingo or the king?
Uh, I mean, there's particular things like she's a bit simpler in terms of silhouette, first of all. So I thought I really wanted to play around with some master controllers, and her design just was quite suitable because she got fairly simple shapes, but the design was very appealing at the same time. And I just thought, okay, this is going to work really well with a master controller. And there were just some other general style stuff that I thought was really interesting. Like she's got kind of the sharp elbow going on when they bend. They obviously that's just Heather's style, but there is no outline unless two things of the same color overlap. So that was kind of an interesting challenge I wanted to take on. And obviously it's based on my friend, so of course I'll take it. So that's pretty much it. Yeah.
We like making fun of Rena.
And before we get into the character rig, Heather, what elements of this character design are you the most proud of?
I think like my favorite thing about her is her silhouette. Like she's got quite a strong silhouette, which I think for character design is quite important. It helps like each character have a very strong silhouette to kind of distinguish each other from themselves. And I love her costume. Like it's super simple. It's not that amazing, but I just like that it has this homemade feel. And she's literally just grabbed things from the closet and tried to make something herself. And you know, yeah, I think that's pretty much it. Like, yeah.
All right, let's jump into the rig. Plowman, can you give us a tour of the Goyle Girl rig and some of the things that you would want to show to an animator who is working with this?
Sure, yeah. So you can see the rig here. So generally, I hadn't really used master controllers and sliders a whole lot, so I definitely wanted to, try that out. But I've also got a bunch of the old school handles like floating around just because I find them very useful. And sometimes personally, I find that quicker than having a slider for some stuff. But where do we start? I guess this is the control panel here. We've got a general turnaround slider, which is pretty straightforward. It's a slider for the turnaround. Then I've kind of split off her other parts as upper body, lower body, and head. So basically each of them will only do a turnaround for the particular part. And the head is just the head. I do want to show off my favorite slider. I wanted to play around with the stack wizard just to see, how usable this would be for me in a production, let's say. So I've created this beautiful slider here, the squat slider. So it also works kind of with the turnaround as well. So she can squat in various turnaround positions. I don't know why this would be useful, but I was trying out, so there you go. Then we've got the head. We've got a slider for the mouse. So what I've kind of done here, I've kind of left a little marker where you'd switch from front to 3/4, just so it's very easy and quick for me to go, okay, mouse from here to there are 3/4, and in this half mouse are front. So it's just easier for me to know that way. We've got sliders for the lids, far lid, and then we've got one that controls both. Pupils, so pretty standard stuff. something that I experimented with, which I found this as I animated more with master controllers. I did a few tests, and one of the things I was kind of struggling with a bit is that if I put the character in expression, let's say, even if I just close the eyes and give her a different mouth, uh, the moment I want to adjust the keyframe I've made and just nudge the head a bit and say, oh, actually, I want her to look up a bit more. The moment I start moving this, everything snaps to default because obviously that's how the slider should work. Sorry, the master controller. So I've kind of made a switch here, which switches between two almost identical master controllers. So now I've switched to one that shouldn't really affect any of her facial features or deformers on the face. So if I decided to now close her lids and do the same mouth, um, basically this one is just to give you very small adjustments. Once you've already keyed out your animation, you just want to be like, okay, I just want to tweak this a tiny bit, you know. And I found this super useful when I was actually animating it. I have a similar thing with the body as well. So by default, the body will kind of snap back. So like if I animate an arm to do anything, this will just snap it back into the turnaround. And this is also useful, so you can kind of get your character back on model very quickly. But I kind of wanted another variation of the master controller where it would keep whatever animation you've got on the arm. So the body would kind of turn, but the arm stays as you've got it set up. I mean, I can see a lot of uses for this. Probably you could do something similar with a lower body too. In this case, I didn't think I really needed it, but I can totally see it being pretty useful for something like that. I've got a bunch of other things that I've kind of used before in productions, and personally, I just find them useful. So there's a whole bunch of hidden hands and feet. They're just floating hands and feet, and those are used when you really 100% want to make sure something's planted. So obviously, she's got her bones, kind of two sets of bones that are just standard, so it bends from the knee, but it's also got the reverse one where it will bend from the ankle. But I've also got a set of floating feet, so this would basically be something like this. It's a hidden foot that switches on as the other foot switches off. So I can put it somewhere. I want to make sure this character does not move from this position here. And from this point, I can kind of move the whole character around and pose her and make sure this foot never ever moves from there. Because feet being planted is one of the things that I always struggle with. And animation in general, I think, kind of struggle with. So I just like having this option. I have the same with the hands. I don't think you'd probably use it as much, but there are cases when you do, so I find it useful. And the last thing on the bottom here, we've got some on-off switches that I've made, and those are on a lot of productions I've been on. It's kind of they end up a mix of hand-drawn and rig. And those are basically switches that will just switch off a particular whole group of elements and let you draw. So for example, I can switch the face off, make sure I select this draw here thing. Where's there we go. And then I'll draw something beautiful for a frame, let's say. And the idea is that you can quickly beautiful. You can quickly switch to hand drawn where you need to. So I can decide for this frame, it's impossible for me to achieve something with the face or with the head or with the body or whatever. I'm going to just draw it in for this one frame, switch it off, then switch it back on for the next frame, so on and so on. Otherwise, what's interesting, she's got some constraints going. So her hair, because it's so puffy, I thought it would be a good idea to have a bit of a bouncy constraint to it, and it works pretty nicely. So you don't have to do too much animation with physical envelopes as well, but you don't need to use them a whole lot if you really don't want something super specific. Sharp elbows, that was something interesting with the design that I kind of took on as a challenge just to see, how easy it is to set it up. The way I set up probably isn't the most ideal, but it's pretty automated, and also you can adjust it quite a lot, which I like. So the way it kind of works is that I've got a little patch here, um, which I have constraints on either end that are, one is linked to the lower arm, one to the upper arm, so it's fully automated, kind of stretching and expanding. And at the same time, I've got cutters on the arms that define the shape a bit better, just to shape it up a bit. You can probably see in the drawings up here. But on top of that, you still can grab this patch and reshape it wherever you need to, because sometimes I've noticed with those kind of elbows, because it's such a graphic design, you want a very particular shape so the design looks as nice as possible. And the other thing was the challenge with the outlines. So the character doesn't really have outlines normally, but when something of one color goes in front of something else of the same color, it needs to have an outline appear. So you can kind of see here when it's in front of her body, it gets an outline. The moment it goes in front of the trousers, it stops. That was the whole system I had to kind of build to accommodate that with the legs and the arms. Anything else interesting? The usual kind of handles, face, full head. That's disturbing. I'll close it. Her legs are kind of specific too. So one of the things with her design is that she's got, yeah, just stand up. There you go. She's got those lines on the side of her leg that kind of go down the whole leg. And this is something where with this design, it really helped that it didn't have outlines, because I could kind of push it in front of everything. So I kind of have two versions of this. One is just a continuous line. It's fairly easy to manipulate. So like I've kind of created a point at the knees, and you can just bend it from here to follow the leg. But also I've kind of created another option where it's split in two, where let me just change the leg real quick. Where if I bend the leg, they each follow one half. And this is more in cases where you would need, because of perspective, to kind of break up the line. Sometimes it might need to just appear on the upper leg or not the lower, and this is just kind of an option for you to have that. I've got some, what else is there? Those are just cutters on the side of the arm because of just how the design is. I think the other stuff is pretty straightforward, to be fair, kind of old school stuff with handles. But yeah, I think that's about it. I did a quick animation test, actually. I can maybe show you that. Just to
Yeah, let's take a
see
look.
just to see how she handles. And I was kind of a bit surprised how easy it was for me. I'm not really used to using master controllers, as I said, so it was actually, this took me, I don't know, maybe like 40 minutes to get this. And obviously it helps because I built the rig, so I know exactly why I built the things the way I built them. But yeah, I was pretty happy with the result in the end.
Yeah, I think this is a really clever rig, and there are a few things that are really impressive, like you mentioned, the elbows and the solution you had to adjust some of the points so that you can keep the appeal of the character. I know that having any line or texture on a character's limb at the point where it bends is always really tricky, so I was really impressed with how you did that with the pants. Heather, I wanted to ask you, how similar is this or different to designs that you make in like your day-to-day work?
So I work in games, so the process for us is probably a little bit different to how they work in animation production. But I guess when I was working with Plamen on this, the difference was that I just needed to supply him with the kind of rough character sketches for the turnaround, so the head tilts and like the little extra bit of assets sketches for him. Whereas when I'm working for games, I have to create the final finished pieces myself in Photoshop. That's why I'm very OCD about naming everything. Everything's got to be named. So when I hand them over, there's no confusion as to what they are. So yeah, I have to literally create every single possible asset that the animator will need to animate the character or things in the background or whatever.
So would you usually split off joints and everything when you're designing?
Yeah,
Okay.
so I tend to kind of because I'm from an animation background, so I know how things need to be cut up and animated. And if I'm not sure, then I'll sit down with the animator who's going to be working on that project and just kind of ask them how they would like the character to be broken down for them, and then I'll like design the final render in that way in Photoshop, and then hand that over to them, and they will rig it from that point. Yeah, so I think that was like the main difference kind of working. I think the process in terms of like pre-prod and production, like design stages and stuff like that are very similar, but yeah, when we work very, very closely with the animation team.
No, it's really cool to hear entirely different production pipeline with game development. I know it's very different than what the concerns are for animating for TV. Plamen, was this rig similar to or different from characters that you typically work with in productions?
Yeah, I think it was quite similar. I mean, apart from all the master controls, which is, I guess, the main thing about it. So I guess it's not, but in terms of the setup of it and where you expect to find things, like, I mean, this rig will be absolutely usable without the master controllers as a rig on a production. Absolutely, I think so. This just adds extra, usability to it, I think. So the rig itself, yeah, that's the main difference for me. That usually on the productions I've been on, we haven't really had the master controllers, and this was kind of a test to me. Like, okay, with what I know about the productions I've been on and the experience I've got, how can I try and implement those features to make them, for me at least, usable in a production? Uh, and I think it was mostly a success. Honestly, it definitely took me longer than I would like to, because there was a lot of back and forth with me just working out, okay, does this in between smoothly, and I need to redo this master controller for the 10th time now. But obviously that's something I haven't done much of, and I'm kind of getting used to it. And also there are ways for me to speed it up. So yeah, it was a really good exercise just to test, okay, how viable would this be on a production?
If you could go back in time and give yourself one piece of advice, what would it be?
Oh man, before I started the rig,
On this rig, not like your whole life. I mean, if you want to do that too, we could go into
that
that.
was going to be deep. For this rig, oh man, I don't know. I would say, okay, I know what. I would have said go and prep everything before you start making your master controllers, because I was so excited to make them, and I hadn't properly done everything, and I was kind of doing it as I was making the master controller. So there was way more redoing and back and forth with me making those than there should have been, just because I was like, yeah, I really want to see her head turn around without, without realizing, oh wait, I forgot to put the lids in. So that was a whole saga there. Yeah, I think that's the biggest thing. So yeah, lessons learned, huh?
And Heather, is there anything that you learned during this process of making these characters that either informed your decisions of character design going forward, or gave you some things to think about with character design?
Um, I think like the things that I probably learned with this was I think this project specifically helped me kind of get out of my head a bit about my artistic block that I had, and just not worry about what you're putting down on paper initially. Just get those ideas out, because I'm always a bit like I'm a bit hard on myself in the beginning. Like I'm doing these really bad sketches. I'm like, I've been studying for years for this, and why can't I draw? And that's like the hardest thing for me, is to kind of learn about just get those out, keep drawing, and eventually you'll like just push through it, and you'll come up with something fun. And I think that's the main thing, is just to have fun when you're doing these designs. And I think that's what helped a lot as well. I was designing them from my friends, people that I know, so I could, it made it something that I actually enjoyed going back to, and wanting to work on and explore the different styles and find out what would work for this kind of, if there was ever to be an animation from this, or a little short film, like always thinking about like the most appealing look for something, for me at least, that I'd like to work on something like this. So.
Yeah, you had some poses for her, right? Wait, where was it?
Oh yeah, I did. Yeah, so this was kind of
there we go, some exploration. Yeah, that's really cool.
Yeah, because she's a bit of a weirdo. I mean, we're all kind of a bit weird in our group. But I just love that she kind of embraces it. It's pretty much my friend, but just turned up a dial.
A few dials, yeah.
Yeah. She's just kind of embracing her weird side, and I was having fun, like trying to figure out her shape and how she moves and her limitations with her form, because she's got she's got very tiny feet, very tiny hands, and I didn't know if like she could squat, and I was trying to figure out how to body squat and like with her proportions and stuff like that. And I just forced it, and I was like, that's just how it's gonna be.
It's kind of what you do when you animate the rig, really. You just kind of force it into whatever shape you need.
Yeah. I mean, my initial drawings for these were awful, but I had to keep reminding myself, like, this is just exploration. You can work on it a bit more later. So yeah, I think it's just like learning to like be okay to do bad drawings and like have fun.
And Plamen, you mentioned that, or actually Heather, you mentioned that you're the sort of artist who has things really meticulously like labeled, and everything is properly named and organized in a logical way. I'm definitely the sort of person who, in my projects, have folders titled Untitled 1, Untitled 2, Layer, 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 which is a bad habit that I'm trying to break. Plamen, I was wondering if you could show us some of the like rig hierarchy and some of the way that you like constructed this rig. So just keeping that in mind.
give the node view some love. Sure, yeah. It's one of the things where I used to be more like you, Mike. I used to be like, okay, render 0001, final. But and then looking at my old kind of rigs, I'm just like, I can't look at this. This is disgusting. But I've tried to kind of keep to some sort of production standard, like just abbreviating stuff with putting in a group and all that. But this is kind of the giant beast that what it looks like. I like kind of backdropping bits and pieces to have, to be able to quickly kind of grab them. But again, the setup is fairly standard, I would say, to any production rig, really. We've got kind of going left to right. At least that's how I usually do it. I go head, body, arms, hips, legs. So I kind of always know on each rig, this is the exact kind of way to read it, Otherwise, I've got, if I zoom here, pretty standard setup, using some layering, a bunch of deformers. Those red backdrops next to everything, those are the empty drawings where if I switch an element off, this is where you draw. If you need something hand drawn. Then I like keeping all my handles at the bottom and all my down. That's my new thing. My master controllers also go at the bottom. Looks very, very neat. And yeah, just labeling stuff, that's pretty useful, just because obviously on this one I'm working on, it's myself working on it, but if I open this 2 years later or something, I'll still know what's where. Or on a production, if someone has to open your rig, it's way easier to find their way around it if everything's labeled. So yeah, I'd say I've definitely learned to be way more careful about naming. And let me see, make an experiment here and try and find drawing, see if I've forgotten to rename something in the rig. Yep, I have. There you go. I have one. I bet you it's just one. Yeah, just one.
That's pretty good.
And this is the backdrop. This is the background of the panel. So I'll allow that. It's fine. But I usually try and be pretty meticulous with naming.
I'm proud of you.
Oh, thank you.
I mean, the amount of elements that are in this rig is really impressive. What was the most challenging thing to implement from your point of view?
Um, I don't know. I think we're just setting up the master controls in a way where it's all smooth, and also I really wanted to make it kind of smooth to the as smooth as it can be. So like if I see, I would keep kind of in betweening, and if something pops up, I have to be okay. Redo this. But in terms of the rig hierarchy itself, I don't think there was anything super out of the ordinary different than what I've done before on other productions. A lot of those things, especially like the on-off switches and stuff, come from other projects I was on when I was like, okay, we need a way of easily switching bits on and off. And it's actually a really weird way of doing it. There's probably a better way, but this is kind of something I kind of worked out, which is using a transformation switch. So basically, the way this works is that you link whichever your element you want to hide is to a group with a transformation switch. I literally have on one of the outputs of that, I've got a peg that is just set to 0, 0 on scaling. So basically, when I swap the two drawings for the handle that switches between the group of transformation switch that just goes nowhere and another one that just scales it down to 0. So it's how I hide it. And then I have another switch, which is the reverse thing for the thing I want to appear. So that's how I switch things on, and then another thing switches off at the same time. So it's actually a really stupid way of doing it, but actually it works. But yeah, in terms of challenge with this one, I think it was fairly standard, honestly. I think for me the challenge was more setting up the master controllers than the rig itself, just because I haven't done it much.
We're getting a lot of very positive comments about the character design and rig in the chat, which is really sweet. Thank you, Keyframe, and someone who we had recently on the show, Camilla Barbizon Crescent, had mentioned, wanted to know how long you both spent designing the character and the rig.
Yeah. I don't know. How do you know how did you keep track of how long you spent? Just because we were working on this pretty much after work or on the weekends, so it's not something where we went and worked for a week or two. But did you keep track, Heather?
Well, the character was already designed, so I think I did that in about a couple of days, if that. And it was months ago. I can't remember. But in terms of providing the kind of sketches for Plamen,
It's like
about a day,
less than 2 days, I think.
Yeah.
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 Yeah. It was for me. I quite enjoyed how fluid the whole process was. Just because usually on a production, the designs are fairly rigid in terms of, okay, this is the design, you have to match it as perfect as you can. And here, obviously, I try to stick to it as much as I can, and especially with particular kind of rules of Heather's idea of the design. But also, it was very much kind of fair game where like give me some characters and have them 2 hours later, and then I'm kind of matching them into the rig.
Yeah.
And testing, making sure they in between smoothly where I need to, I just nudge something a bit. And yeah, it was very much a fluid process like that. But if I have to kind of calculate the whole time I spent on the rig, probably maybe like a week and a half, including all the master, because I think I had a lot of back and forth with the master controls just because of how messy I was making them to begin with. Just I started to make them way too early in the process because I was so excited, as I said. If I had it, kind of planned out properly, like you should, probably would have been a week, I would guess. Now it's a bit longer.
Yeah, but this is also research and design rig from you, so like it makes sense that a big part of this is exploration and figuring out how new technologies and new processes work. So it makes a lot of sense. We have a question in the chat. Do you have a list of things that you follow to test a rig through? So it's like if you create a rig, what do you sort of run it through to make sure everything works?
That's a good question. I mean, I do have kind of a list for those things. I'd usually make sure one of the first things actually would be to check all the pivots, because that's such a basic thing, but it's one of the basis of the rig actually working. So it kind of literally go through the whole thing and go like, okay, here, spam B, okay, looks good, spam B looks good, B looks good, and literally do that for the whole rig. Just make sure all my pivots are right. And just start from the basics really. Go, okay, then an arm. Yep, go then the other way, push it behind the body. So just start with basic stuff like that. Then I would probably go into some posing. Just try and get a pose that, in this case, Heather had some really nice examples of, some kind of action poses or making a character squat. That's quite a tricky thing to do generally. Um, so I'll just try those and be like, well, this breaks here, this line breaks here, and this is how you'd find the more elaborate things. Because as I was testing, there was also some back and forth on this because some of the outlines won't work, or I need some extra cutters somewhere, or something like that, or extra handles, any of those things. And this is actually how my idea of having the head and the body switch came up. It is because I was kind of setting things up using the master controls, be like, oh, I just kind of want to tweak this tiny thing, and then the whole head, pop into the turnaround pose. Yeah, so that's kind of where it came from, and that's one of the things I think I'm the happiest with from the rig. Just the way I work, it just allows me to work how I like working. I don't know if people might hate it, but um, that's for my way of working. It's really useful.
Yeah, I think so long as you get the end result, I think that animation is definitely sort of the art of cheating and making things appear. We're making drawings appear like they're moving. At the end of the day, whatever you can do to get the final image is really important. We had another question from Camilla, and I think I'll throw this to both Plamen and Heather. Do you think rigging a character without a line is easier or harder than a character with an outline, or would you say it's about the same? And Heather, for you, I would ask, like, do you prefer designing characters with or without outlines?
I don't think I have like a massive preference. It always will depend on like the project that I'll be on, if what is required from the character. But I tend to like start off, sketching in line first, anyways. But yeah, I think like the thing with working with flat color characters, I feel like it's easier for animators to work with. It's there's less restrictions for them, and it makes their life a little bit easier, in my opinion. I think, and very little textures or things going on, so things don't move around crazy if you try and animate characters with textures as well. Because Plamen in the beginning was a bit worried about the texture and the hair and like on her face and so I was like, let's just keep it super simple. It doesn't matter. I wasn't being really like hard and fast with the rules or like how she had to be. I'm quite happy to be adaptive for the animators. So yeah.
In terms of the questions for outlines or not, I mean, I do it's just a personal preference. I do like characters without outlines. That's one of the things I really liked about the character, just because it has no outlines, the shapes have to be really strong, and I really like that. Um, I don't think there's a massive difference, honestly. There are particular issues you can get with either of those things. Um, the one thing personally is my nightmare would be a texture outline. This is the thing. I mean, a lot of shows have it. You gotta have it. But it's one thing where it's definitely. I think is the most complex, just because there's so many things that can go wrong with a textured outline, especially if it's like really fuzzy or um,
Do the
exaggerated in some way.
aliasing.
Yes, my favorite. Yep, for sure. But yeah, otherwise, obviously, whenever you're rigging anything, you've got to follow the general style that the show's going for. So, with this design, as Heather said, we kind of were pretty open, and it ended up kind of in the middle because I do like that on the inside it does have the kind of fuzzy texture on the details and the lines here, but then wherever you've got actual outlines, they are pretty smooth, and it just gives it something extra, but also doesn't make life hard for animators. Like, you just kind of pick your battles. Where do you want the texture? Make the texture in a really obvious place where it's really open, it's not on a joint or something, and then that makes the character pop out even more, but at the same time keep things simple and workable for animators. And that's kind of like one of the things I really enjoy on most productions when you're developing, the style of it with animation and design in mind. Oh, sorry, with animation and rig in mind, and talking with design between those three departments, you kind of all of you end up throwing a bit of an idea. Okay, this will be horrible for animators, can we tweak it in design? And then the designer like, well, can we put the texture here? And then you kind of arrive at a an in-between solution that just looks good and works for animators. So in this case, I think that's kind of what we ended up with as well.
You sort of get into a moment of like, why can't we put stripes all over the arm? Well, you really don't want to.
Because you have gray hair,
Yeah.
Yeah,
Butters.
yeah. So one of the questions with like some of the challenges about having like a lineless style, I think you addressed it early on, where you have the like, what do you do when two elements that have the same color overlap each other, and how do you deal with like, okay, well, maybe sometimes you want to have a line there.
Yeah, I mean, with this particular one, it's fairly straightforward. It's just a bunch of colors, and whenever anything passes in front of something of the same color, the line will appear. But also within the actual drawing, you can add more drawing subs. I currently don't have that many, just because this is kind of almost like a proof of concept. I haven't done a full set of breakdowns or anything, but normally you'd probably have a few variations. So you'll be like, oh, I want a slightly shorter line here, or you'd want just a line on one side but not the other, or something like that, like have a gap. You know, very easy to adjust, which is nice. But also the general rule, like basically the general rule that's set up for all those lines is if it's in front of something of the same color, it will appear. If it's not, it won't, which is kind of the logic of how it was designed to begin with.
So I want to throw a fun question at you. Um, I think with animation, it's really easy for viewers to sort of absorb it and not understand all of the craft and labor that is involved in an episode of a TV show they watch. So I wanted to ask, what are some common misconceptions that viewers might have about cutout characters? And I'll throw the question to both of you if you have any thoughts about it. We can start with Plamen.
Sure, yeah. I mean, that's kind of a good question, because obviously we are from two different industries. So it will be interesting to hear what Heather has got to say about the game one. But I mean, I think it's interesting because nowadays a lot of people who are obviously not working in the industry are still aware of what a rig is, which still surprises me to this day, but like it's a thing now. And kind of it seems like a very popular opinion to be like, oh, it's a rig, like it's kind of really wooden, and the movement looks so janky, which definitely can be true. Don't get me wrong, but it's kind of you mentioned it earlier, Mike. I feel like it's just a tool, really. So if you've got a good animator who's got a good understanding of motion and posing, you got a nice animation out of anything. And the only reason why the rigs are a thing is that they make things faster. So I think any rigger, when they're building a rig, their first thought is, how do I make this easier to use by animators, really? Like on any production, the riggers won't be thinking, how do I get like a cool slider for squats? Definitely not
It
this.
is a cool slider.
This breaks horribly. There we go. Yeah, like that's not their first thought, because obviously I might enjoy this, but it's completely useless for an animator. Your thought would be, how do I make life easier for animators to get a nice pose out of this character quick? So as long as you've got nice animators, like animators who are skilled, know what they do, animation looks great. So yeah, I feel like it's just another tool of making animation, really. What do you think, Heather?
I think a lot of people that don't know much about the animation industry and cutout animations particularly, like I think their first thought initially is it's old fashioned and
Or like flash animation?
yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
like really likes this kind of movement. There's not much else going on, and I think that they don't realize like with technology today that it's so much more versatile and advanced, and there's so many great tools like the mask slide and the way that you can like deform the shapes to make them feel a bit more like three-dimensional or like fluid. So yeah, I think people just think it's clunky, but I think it's the great thing about cutout animation. It forces not just the designer but the animators and the riggers like to try and think of inventive new ways of making something look good, in animation. Um, you kind of have to think outside of the box in terms of, as a designer, like what kind of assets does this animator need to be able to get the character to do what they need to do. But particularly with in games, we can't just provide a library of 1,000 assets to our animators because we constantly have to think about optimization. So our games have to load very, very quickly on devices. So we have to be quite restricted to what we can do. We can't even use meshes sometimes because they are, and or deformers or anything like that. They have to be really like restricted to what they can do. So we have to be very smart about getting around those kind of challenges, I think. But yeah, it's fun. It challenges you every day, which is good.
You don't want to add like an extra 12 gigabytes to a download because you wanted to make sure that like a blink was really smooth.
Exactly. Yeah. Like if we can get away with doing like really complicated and flashy looking things in code, then they will. It would allow our animators a bit more space to do cool stuff, which is good. So we have to think about like reusing a lot of assets and kind of squishing things and stretching things. And it's like the same asset, it's just been done. We've manipulated it. So yeah.
This whole conversation was delightful. I wanted to ask you both, Heather, where can viewers find more of your work?
So I just use kind of Instagram right now to post all my work, which is at Heather Vogel Art. Yeah, I don't really post anything on blogs these days. So it's just literally Instagram.
And Plamen, where can people find more of your work?
Well, I'm even more old-fashioned than Heather. I don't have Instagram. I mean, I've pretty much been trying to post a bit more on LinkedIn, honestly. So it's probably the easiest way to find any of my stuff. I'll probably post some demo of the rig soon on there. But it's just my first name, not my surname. If you can spell my surname, congratulations. Otherwise, I don't know.
Well, we'll include links in the chat so people will be able to find your work. Thank you to everyone who joined us for today's Rig Show and Tell. If anyone is interested in watching, if anyone who's watching this is interested in rigging or animating their characters using the same tools relied on by animation studios around the world, you can download a 21-day trial of Harmony Premium from our website, that is toonboom.com, and be sure to join us next Wednesday for Collaboratory. That's our Storyboard Pro improv show. Storyboard artist and director Mike Morris will be now joining us for 2 Wednesdays each month so we can start and finish a animatic within the span of 2 hours. You won't want to miss it, so be sure to tune in next time.